The air in the banquet hall was thick, heavy with the kind of warmth that settles into your bones and makes you wish you could vanish. I stood near the back, just beyond the glow of the chandeliers, my hands knotted together, fingers worrying the edge of my sweater. The tables gleamed with white tablecloths, each one adorned with name cards, wine glasses, and neatly folded napkins. I searched for my place, my eyes darting from card to card, hoping to find my name. Kelly Harper. There was nothing, not a single seat for me. I should have seen it coming. 2 weeks earlier, my cousin Laura had called her voice sharp and sweet, like sugar, laced with something bitter. Kelly. You should come to the veterans' dinner, she'd said. It's to honor the heroes you know. Then after a pause, she added, but maybe don't talk. It's not really your place, is it? Her laugh had cut through the phone, quick and cruel. I'd stayed silent, clutching the receiver until the line went dead. Not my place. As if she had any idea who I was. Now here I was, watching the room swell with familiar faces. My brother Tom stood at the head table, his broad frame commanding attention, as he clapped the mayor on the shoulder. His wife Karen sparkled in a dress that caught the light, her laughter rising above the murmur of the crowd. They hadn't noticed me. I didn't want them to. I pressed myself against a column, my breath shallow, my body half hidden in the shadows. The room smelled of roasted meat and floral perfume, but all I felt was the ache of being invisible. My name is Kelly. I'm 48, and I live in a quiet house at the edge of town where the pavement gives way to dirt, and the night sky drowns out the chatter of neighbors. People call me Kelly sometimes, Miss Kelly, as if I'm a librarian or an old maid they've already written off. They smile when they say it, but their gazes slip past me like I'm a ghost. They don't need to acknowledge. I don't challenge them. I don't share who I used to be. Some secrets are too heavy to drag into a place like this. The dinner was underway now. The mayor took the podium, his voice thundering through the speakers, weaving tales of courage and sacrifice. I watched from my corner, my feet aching in the stiff shoes I'd chosen. I'd worn my only good dress, a deep blue one I'd bought years ago for a memorial service. It still fit, though it draped a little looser now, and I'd swept my hair into a simple updo, hoping it might make me seem less plain. But standing here, I felt myself fading, dissolving into the faded gold of the wallpaper. Laura sat near the front, her blonde curls glinting under the lights. She leaned toward the woman beside her, their whispers followed by a shared giggle. I knew that sound. I'd heard it at family gatherings, at church suppers, in the aisles of the market, when Laura thought I was out of earshot. Kelly's just Kelly, she'd say. No husband, no kids, no real life. What does she even do? I'd always let it go. I'd smile, not offer to wash the plates. But tonight, those words burrowed deeper, like a thorn I couldn't pull free. I shouldn't have come. I'd nearly stayed home, tucked into my armchair with a novel and a mug of chamomile the way I spent most nights. But something had drawn me here. Maybe it was my father's voice echoing from years past, telling me these dinners were sacred, a way to honor those who'd served. Maybe it was a flicker of hope that just once someone might see me, not the Kelly they'd decided I was, but the woman I'd been, the woman I still carried inside. Whatever it was, it felt like a misstep now. The mayor's speech ended, and the room erupted in applause. Tom rose next, his shoulders squared, ready to deliver his own words. He'd served a short tour in the National Guard, and he wore that time like a crown, his voice rich with pride as he spoke of honor and duty. I didn't resent him for it. But when his eyes swept the room, they glided right past me. It stung sharp and sudden, like a wound I hadn't known was there. My own brother and I was nothing to him. I turned toward the exit, my fingers brushing the cool handle of the door. I wanted out, away from the noise, the eyes, the weight of their indifference. But before I could push through, Laura's voice sliced through the crowd. "Kelly, you're not leaving already, are you?" She was on her feet now, her smile wide, but her eyes like ice. Heads turned. "Stay, it's a party. No need to skulk in the shadows." Her tone was honeyed, but it hit like gravel. A few people snickered. My cheeks burned hot and tight. I tried to speak to find some reply that would shield me, but my throat closed. Words had always failed me here with them. I'd spent too long keeping my voice chained, my truths locked behind vows and memories I couldn't share. My hand slipped from the door, and I turned back, my pulse hammering. I didn't want to stay, but I couldn't flee, not with their gazes pinning me down, waiting for me to shrink smaller. I found a chair at the back, one meant for the waitstaff, and sank into it. My hands shook in my lap, and I pressed them together, forcing them still. The dinner carried on, plates, clattered speeches, droned glasses, clinked in toasts. I watched it all, my chest tight, my mind slipping to places I hadn't visited in years. Places of dust and danger, of quiet orders, given in the dark of moments when I'd been more than Kelly, more than a shadow. I didn't know then that the night was far from over. I didn't know that someone else was watching someone who saw me not as a forgotten figure, but as a name on a roster, a name that carried weight. I didn't know that soon this room would fall silent, and the truth I'd hidden would rise like a wave, sweeping away their smirks, their pity, their disdain. But I'm rushing ahead. Let me bring you back. Let me show you what it was to stand in that hall, to carry a secret, heavier than their scorn, to wait for a moment I didn't know was near. If you're here with me, if you're listening, I need you to stay. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been dismissed, anyone who stood tall when the world demanded they kneel. If you want to hear what comes next, hit that subscribe button. Join me because I'm not finished. I'm only starting. I sat there, the chair's edge digging into my spine, the room alive with voices and the clatter of silverware. My eyes traced the ceiling, its chipped paint, its dimming fixtures. I thought of my father, how he'd sit at our old kitchen table after his own veteran dinners, his medals hidden in a box. It's not about the applause, Kelly, he'd say, his voice low. It's about what you hold inside. I'd trusted those words once. Now they felt like a weight I couldn't carry. Laura's giggle rang out again, and I shut my eyes, willing it to fade. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I sensed it like the hum of a storm building far off. I'd spent years being quiet, being less. But silence has its own power, and when it breaks, it speaks louder than any voice. The mayor called for another toast, and glasses rose, catching the light. I stayed still, my hands folded, my heart a drumbeat in my chest. I'd come here out of duty, out of memory, but now I felt trapped, caught in a room that didn't want me. Yet something held me there, some thread of instinct I couldn't name. I'd learned long ago to trust that feeling even when it led me into the dark. The night stretched on, and I watched the crowd, their faces blurred by the haze of my thoughts. Laura's voice drifted back softer now, but still sharp, still mocking. I let it pass over me like wind over stone. I'd endured worse than her words, far worse. But endurance isn't the same as healing, and every slight, every laugh carved a little deeper into the quiet I'd built around myself. I didn't know it yet, but the room was about to change. The air was about to shift. Someone was coming, someone who knew my name, not the Kelly they saw, but the Kelly I'd been, the Kelly I'd buried. And when they spoke, the silence I'd carried for so long would finally break. The banquet hall hummed around me, a blur of clinking glasses and murmured conversations, but I was somewhere else. My hands rested in my lap, still trembling from Laura's words, but my mind had slipped away, back to a place I hadn't let myself visit in years. A place of dust and shadow where the air smelled of gunpowder and fear, where my name wasn't just Kelly, but a whispered code, a marker of trust, in rooms where trust was a currency harder to earn than blood. I was 26, my boots heavy with sand, my eyes scanning a horizon that never stopped burning. The memory came sharp and unbidden, a night in a desert compound, the stars above us cold and unyielding. I'd been part of a team, a shadow unit, the kind that didn't exist on paper. My job was to listen to decode to carry secrets across borders no one else could cross. That night, we'd intercepted a signal, a fragment of chatter that could have saved a convoy or doomed it. My hands had shaken then too, but not from shame, from the weight of lives resting on my choice. I blinked and the banquet hall snapped back into focus. The mayor was laughing at something Tom had said, his voice carrying over the crowd. I pressed my fingers into my palms, grounding myself. Those days were gone sealed behind oaths I'd sworn to keep. I'd left that life, or it had left me, and I'd come back to this town, to this house, to this version of myself that felt like a stranger. Sometimes I wondered if I'd dreamed it all. The missions, the medals, the moments when I'd been more than invisible. I'd never told anyone. Not Tom, not Laura, not even my father before he passed. He'd been proud of his own service, his stories of Vietnam worn smooth from retelling. But I couldn't share mine. Some were classified, bound by laws I'd never break. Others were too heavy, too raw, like wounds that never fully closed. There was a night god. I didn't want to think about it, but it came anyway. A safe house in a city I can't name, a firefight that left 2 of my team dead. I'd carried one of them, out his blood soaking my uniform, his breath fading against my shoulder. I'd earned my first bronze star that night, but all I remembered was the weight of him, the way his eyes had locked on mine until they didn't. I shifted in my chair, the wood creaking under me. The room was louder now, the speeches giving way to chatter and laughter. Laura's voice floated above it, bright and cutting as she leaned toward her table mates. I didn't look at her. I didn't want to see the smirk, the pity. Instead, I let my gaze drift to my hands, to the faint scar across my knuckles, a reminder of a knife fight in a place I'd never name. I'd been someone else then, someone who didn't flinch at danger, who didn't shrink from a room full of eyes. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I'd come home and I'd tried to be Kelly again, the Kelly they wanted, quiet, small, unremarkable. I'd let them define me, let their words chip away at the woman I'd been. I told myself it was easier this way, that the past was better left buried. But sitting here in this chair meant for someone else I felt the weight of that choice. It wasn't just their scorn that hurt. It was the way I'd let it silence me, the way I'd let myself forget who I was. Another memory surfaced softer this time, a training camp years before the desert. I was 22, my body aching from days of drills, my mind buzzing with codes and protocols. My instructor, a woman with steel in her eyes, had pulled me aside one evening. "Harper," she'd said, her voice low, "you've got something rare. You don't need to shout to be heard, but don't you ever let anyone make you small." I'd carried her words like a talisman, through every mission, every loss. But somewhere along the way, I'd let them slip, let them fade under the weight of this town's expectations. I looked up, my eyes catching on Tom as he moved through the crowd, his hand on Karen's arm, his laugh easy and loud. He'd always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When he'd joined the National Guard, the town had thrown a parade. When I'd left for some government job, as I'd called it, no one had asked questions. I'd preferred it that way. But now, watching him bask in their admiration, I felt a pang, not jealousy, but something closer to grief. For the sister he'd never known, for the stories I'd never told. The truth was, I didn't belong here. Not in this room, not in this version of my life. I'd spent years pretending I did, smiling through Laura's jabs, nodding at Tom's indifference, letting the town wrap me in their assumptions. But every night when I closed my door and sat in the quiet of my house, I remembered. The weight of a rifle in my hands, the crackle of a radio in the dark, the lives I'd saved and the ones I couldn't. Those memories didn't fade no matter how many years I spent folding laundry or tending my garden. I'd tried to move on. I'd taken a job at the library shelving books, helping kids with their homework. It was steady, safe, the kind of work no one questioned. But sometimes, when I was alone, I'd pull out the small wooden box I kept under my bed. Inside were my medals. 3 bronze stars, their edges worn from the times I'd held them. I'd trace their outlines, remembering the moments they'd been earned, the people I'd been with, the person I'd been. Then I'd lock them away again because what good were they here? This town didn't want a hero. They wanted Kelly, the spinster, the nobody. The banquet hall grew quieter now, the speeches winding down. I felt the weight of the evening pressing on me, the ache in my chest growing sharper. I wanted to leave, to slip out before anyone noticed, but my legs wouldn't move. Something held me there, some instinct I couldn't name. I'd learned to trust that feeling long ago in places where hesitation meant death. It was the same instinct that had kept me alive, that had brought me home, that had kept me silent all these years. I thought about my father again, his voice soft in my memory. "You don't need their praise, Kelly," he'd said once, his hand on mine. "You carry your honor in your bones." I'd believed him then when I was young and the world felt conquerable. But now, sitting in this room, surrounded by people who saw me as less than nothing, I wasn't sure. Honor was a heavy thing to carry alone. Another laugh from Laura's table pulled me back. I didn't look at her, didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I let my eyes drift to the window, to the dark beyond the glass. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who'd walked through fire, who'd carried secrets that could have toppled governments. She was still in me somewhere, buried under years of silence and smallness. I just didn't know how to find her anymore. The night was far from over, though I couldn't know it then. I couldn't know that someone was coming, someone who carried my name like a beacon, someone who'd seen the truth I'd hidden. I couldn't know that soon this room would hush, and the weight of my past would shift, turning their laughter to silence, their pity, to awe. But I'm moving too fast. Let me stay here a moment in the quiet of that chair, in the ache of being unseen. Let me tell you what it was to carry a life no one knew, to hold a truth no one wanted. If you're still with me, if you're listening, know that this is for you, for anyone who's ever felt their worth buried, anyone who's ever waited for the world to see them. The story's not done. It's only unfolding. I sat there, my hands still, my heart a steady drumbeat. The room spun on oblivious, but I felt it, the stir of something coming, like the first breath of a storm. I'd been silent for so long, but silence is a language of its own, and mine was about to speak. The banquet hall seemed to shrink around me, the chatter and clatter of the veterans' dinner pressing in like a tide. I sat in my borrowed chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my eyes fixed on a crack in the floorboard. Laura's laugh still echoed in my ears, sharp and careless, but I didn't look at her. I didn't look at anyone. I'd learned long ago how to make myself small, how to let their words glance off me like stones skipping over water. But tonight, each one sank a little deeper, lodging in places I thought I'd armored. I'm Kelly Harper, 48 years old, and I've spent the last decade perfecting the art of being unseen. In this town, it's easy. People don't ask questions if you don't give them reasons to. I work at the library, shelving books, helping old folks with their crosswords, guiding kids to the right chapter books. I smile when they thank me, nod when they call me Miss Kelly, and let them assume I've always been this version of myself, quiet, solitary, unremarkable. They don't know about the years I spent in shadows, the missions that left scars on my body and my soul. They don't know because I've never told them, and I've never told them because some truths are too big for a place this small. I shifted in my chair, the wood creaking softly. Across the room, Laura was holding court, her voice bright as she recounted some story about her husband's promotion. The women at her table leaned in, their eyes sparkling with admiration. I knew what came next. I'd seen it before at family dinners, at church picnics, at the market, when Laura thought I wasn't listening. She'd turn the conversation to me, not out of kindness, but to fill the silence with something sharp. Poor Kelly, she'd say, her lips curling just enough to sting. Living all alone in that little house. No family, no prospects. It's such a shame. Tonight was no different. I heard my name soft at first, then louder, like a hook meant to pull me into their spotlight. "Kelly's here somewhere, isn't she?" Laura said, her tone dripping with false concern. Hiding in the back as usual. A few heads turned, searching for me. I kept my eyes down my breath, steady, willing myself to stay still. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. The woman next to Laura, someone I vaguely recognized from the PTA, chimed in. She's so quiet. Always has been. I bet she's never even left this town. They laughed a sound that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I could have stood up. I could have walked to their table, looked Laura in the eye, and told her she was wrong. I could have said, I've been to places you'll never see, done things you'll never understand. But I didn't. I stayed where I was. My hands clasped my heart, a slow, heavy drum. I'd spent too many years keeping my past locked away, bound by oaths and memories I couldn't share. Speaking now would mean unraveling it all, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I let my mind drift not to the desert or the safe houses, but to the small moments that had defined my life here. The way I'd nod when Tom boasted about his guard service, never mentioning my own. The way I'd smile when Karen asked if I was still at the library, as if my life were a single unchanging note. The way I'd walk home alone after family gatherings, the stars above me, brighter than the pity in their eyes. I told myself it didn't matter that their words couldn't touch me. But sitting here, surrounded by their voices, I felt the lie in that. I thought about the library, my safe haven. It was a place where I could be invisible in a way that felt like control, not defeat. I'd spend hours organizing shelves, my fingers brushing over book spines, each one a story someone else had lived. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering what my own story would look like written down. Not the classified parts, not the missions or the medals, but the quiet moments, the way I'd sit in my garden at dawn, the way I'd fold my father's old flag every Veterans Day, the way I'd wake from nightmares and stare at the ceiling, waiting for my pulse to slow. Those were the pieces of me no one saw, the pieces I guarded as fiercely as I'd once guarded secrets. A burst of applause pulled me back. The mayor was introducing another speaker, a local businessman who'd sponsored the dinner. I watched him take the podium, his suit crisp, his smile wide. He talked about community, about honoring those who'd served, but his words felt hollow to me. I wondered if he'd ever known fear, the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that follows you home. I wondered if anyone in this room had. My eyes drifted to Tom, who was laughing with a group of men near the front. He looked so at ease, so sure of his place here. I didn't resent him for it, not really. But there was a part of me that wished he'd turn just once and see me not the sister he thought he knew, but the woman I'd been, the woman I still was. I'd never given him the chance, though. I'd chosen silence, and silence had a way of building walls no one could climb. I thought about the box under my bed, the one with my medals. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe years, but I could still feel them, their weight, their edges, the way they seemed to hum with the stories they held. 3 bronze stars, each one earned, in moments of chaos and courage. I'd never wanted them, not really. I'd wanted the people I'd saved, the lives I'd protected, to be enough. But the medals were what I had proof of a life I couldn't share. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder what would happen if I brought them out, laid them on the table at a family dinner, let them speak for me. But I never did. I was too afraid of what it would mean, of who I'd have to become, to claim that truth. Another laugh from Laura's table, softer this time, but it still found me. I didn't flinch. I'd learned to endure worse bullets, betrayal, the weight of decisions no one should have to make. This was nothing I told myself, just words, just a room full of people who didn't know me. But endurance wasn't the same as strength, and I was tired, so tired of carrying it all alone. I did what I always did when it got too heavy. I helped. I stood quietly, slipping to the side of the room where the waitstaff was clearing plates. I picked up a tray, stacking dishes, my movements automatic. One of the servers, a young woman with tired eyes, looked at me in surprise. "You don't have to do that, ma'am," she said. I smiled, shaking my head. "It's no trouble." She hesitated, then nodded, and we worked in silence, the clink of porcelain, a small anchor in the chaos of the room. Helping was my reflex, my way of staying grounded. I'd done it in the field, too, bandaging wounds, sharing rations, carrying packs when someone else couldn't. It was how I'd survived, how I'd kept myself whole when the world tried to break me. Here in this banquet hall, it was no different. I cleared plates, refilled water pitchers, moved through the room like a ghost. No one noticed, and that was fine. It was easier this way. But even as I worked, I felt it a prickle at the back of my neck, the same instinct that had saved me in dark alleys and desert nights. Something was coming. I didn't know what, didn't know why, but I felt it like the air before a storm. I paused a glass in my hand and glanced at the door. It was still closed, the room still alive with noise, but I knew better than to ignore that feeling. I'd trusted it too many times to doubt it now. I returned to my chair, my heart beating a little faster. The dinner was winding down, the speeches giving way to casual chatter. Laura's voice rose again, but I let it pass over me. I thought about my father, his words echoing in my mind. "You don't need their eyes on you, Kelly," he'd said. "You know who you are." I'd held on to that through every mission, every loss. But here in this room, I wasn't sure I knew anymore. The truth was, I was tired of being invisible, not just to them, but to myself. I'd spent so long hiding, so long pretending that I'd almost forgotten the woman who'd walked through fire, who'd carried lives in her hands. She was still there somewhere waiting for me to find her. I just didn't know how. I didn't know it yet, but the night was about to shift. The door would open and someone would walk through, someone who carried my name like a key. Someone who'd seen the truth I'd buried, who'd speak it in a way I never could. And when they did, this room, this town, this life I'd built on silence would never be the same. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me stay here in the quiet of that moment, in the weight of being unseen. Let me tell you what it was to endure, to carry a past no one knew, to wait for a truth I didn't know was coming. If you're still listening, if you're with me, this is for you, for anyone who's ever been called less than they are, anyone who's ever held their truth in silence. The story's not over. It's only growing. I sat there, my hands still, my eyes on the crack in the floor. The room spun on, but I felt it the stir of something new, something unstoppable. I'd been quiet for so long, but quiet has its own power, and mine was about to break free. The banquet hall buzzed with the kind of energy that comes when a night is almost over, but not quite done. Plates were cleared, wine glasses half empty, and the crowd had settled into a comfortable hum of laughter and small talk. I sat in my corner, the staff chair creaking under me, my hands still folded in my lap like a shield. The crack in the floorboard I'd been staring at seemed to grow a jagged line that felt like it could split the room in two. I wanted to slip out to let the night swallow me whole, but something kept me rooted, some stubborn thread of instinct, or maybe just the ghost of my father's voice telling me to stay. I almost hadn't come. The invitation had sat on my kitchen table for days, Laura's handwriting on the envelope too neat, too deliberate. Veterans Dinner. It read with a date and time and a small note. "Hope you can make it, Kelly." I'd stared at it over my morning coffee, my fingers tracing the edges, wondering why she'd bothered. Laura didn't invite me to things unless there was an audience for her kindness or her cruelty. I'd nearly tossed it in the trash content to spend the evening with my books and my quiet. But then I'd thought of my father, of the way he'd polish his shoes for these dinners, his medals tucked away, but his pride worn openly. I'd thought of the woman I'd been the one who'd faced worse than a room full of pity. So I'd come, and now I was here regretting it with every breath. The room was a sea of faces I knew too well. Tom stood near the front, his arm around Karen, his laugh louder than it needed to be. Laura was at her table, her blonde curls bouncing as she gestured, her voice carrying over the crowd like a bell. The mayor was circulating, shaking hands, his smile as polished as the silverware. They all belonged here in this world of easy chatter and small-town glory. I didn't. I never had. But I'd come anyway dressed in my navy blue dress, my hair pinned up my heart, a quiet drumbeat of doubt. I'd come because I thought maybe I could feel like I belonged even for a moment. That hope had died the second I saw there was no seat for me. Laura's voice still rang in my head, her words from earlier, slicing through the noise. No need to skulk in the shadows, she'd said, her smile a blade. I'd felt the eyes on me, the chuckles, the weight of being seen but not known. I'd wanted to leave then, to walk out and never look back, but I'd stayed. I'd stayed because running felt like surrender, and I'd surrendered enough in my life. I glanced at the door now, its handle glinting in the dim light. It was close, maybe 10 steps away. I could make it without anyone noticing, slip into the cool night air, let the stars be my only witnesses. But my legs wouldn't move. My hands stayed clasped, my back straight, my eyes on that crack in the floor. I'd faced worse than this, nights when the only sound was the crackle of a radio days, when every shadow could be a threat. A room full of dismissive glances was nothing, or so I told myself. The program was winding down, the speeches mostly done. The mayor had returned to his seat, and Tom had given his remarks, his voice full of the kind of pride that comes from being seen. Now, a woman from the local VFW was at the podium, reading off names of veterans who'd passed in the last year. Her voice was steady, reverent, and the room grew quiet, the laughter fading into a respectful hush. I listened, my chest tight, as she named people I'd known, old men who'd sat on porches, telling stories of wars long gone. My father's name wasn't on the list, but I felt him anyway, his presence like a hand on my shoulder. I wondered what he'd think of me now, sitting here silent and small. He'd always said I was stronger than I knew, but I didn't feel strong. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, a woman caught between who I was and who they thought I was. I thought about the box under my bed, the medals I hadn't touched in years. 3 bronze stars, each one, a story I couldn't tell each one, a weight I carried alone. I wondered if he'd be proud, or if he'd see the truth that I'd let this town make me less than I was. The woman at the podium finished, and the room applauded, a soft, solemn sound. I clapped too, my hands barely touching my eyes, still on the floor. I didn't see Laura stand, but I heard her voice bright and sharp, cutting through the quiet. Before we move on, she said, "I just want to say how wonderful it is to see everyone here honoring our veterans. It's so important, isn't it, to recognize the real heroes?" Her tone was warm, but I knew better. I knew what was coming. I braced myself, my fingers tightening in my lap. She turned her eyes, scanning the room until they found me. "And it's so sweet that Kelly's here too," she said, her smile wide but her gaze cold. "She's always so supportive, isn't she? Even if she doesn't have a story to share." The room shifted, heads turning, eyes landing on me. A few people smiled, the kind of smile you give a child who's tried their best. Others whispered their words, too soft to hear, but heavy enough to feel. My face burned, but I didn't move. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the floor, on that crack, willing myself to stay still. I could have stood. I could have walked to the front, looked Laura in the eye, and told her she was wrong. I could have said, "I have stories you'll never know, stories that would silence this room." But I didn't. I stayed where I was, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. I'd spent too long keeping my past buried, locked behind vows I'd never break. Speaking now would mean opening that door, and I wasn't sure I could survive what came through. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I endured. I let her words wash over me, let the whispers fade, let the room move on. The VFW woman returned to the podium, announcing a final toast to the veterans. Glasses rose, catching the chandelier light, and voices murmured in unison. I didn't lift a glass. I didn't have one. But I closed my eyes and made my own toast, silent and private, to the people I'd served with, the ones who hadn't come home. To the woman I'd been the one I'd hidden so well. The toast ended and the room stirred, people shifting in their seats, ready for the night to close. I thought it was over. I thought I'd make it through, slip out quietly, carry my hurt back to my house and bury it like I always did. But then I felt it again, that prickle at the back of my neck, the instinct that had saved me in deserts and dark alleys. I looked up, my eyes drawn to the door. It was still closed, but the air felt different, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was close. I'd felt this before in moments when everything changed, when a mission turned, when a life hung in the balance, when a truth was about to break free. My hands trembled, but I pressed them together, steadying myself. I'd been trained to wait, to watch, to trust my instincts. So I waited, my heart a steady drum, my eyes on the door. Laura was still talking, her voice a background hum, but I barely heard her. My focus was on the door, on the shift in the room, on the feeling that something was about to happen. I thought about my father again, his words echoing in my mind. "You carry your honor in your bones, Kelly," he'd said. I'd believed him once, but here in this room I felt like I'd lost that honor, let it slip away under the weight of their words. But I was wrong. The honor was still there, buried deep, waiting for the right moment to rise. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming, carried on the heels of someone who knew my name, who knew my truth. Someone who'd walk through that door and change everything. I'm moving too fast, though. Let me stay here in the quiet of that chair, in the tension of that room. Let me tell you what it was to sit there, to feel the weight of their dismissal, to sense the storm gathering just out of sight. If you're still with me, if you're listening, this is for you, for anyone who's ever been overlooked, anyone who's ever waited for their truth to be seen. The story's not done. It's building, growing, ready to break. I sat there, my hands still, my eyes on the door. The room moved on, but I was separate, apart, waiting for something I couldn't name. I'd been silent for so long, but silence has a way of holding power, and mine was about to speak. The banquet hall felt like it was holding its breath. The chatter had softened the clink of glasses, fading into a low hum, but the air was charged electric, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. I sat in my corner, my hands pressed together, my eyes fixed on the door. That prickle at the back of my neck hadn't faded. It had grown sharp and insistent, the same instinct that had guided me through dark nights and deadly choices. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was close. My heart beat steady, a rhythm I'd learned to trust, and I waited still as stone while the room moved on around me. Laura's voice drifted from her table, softer now, but still laced with that familiar edge. She was talking about the dinner, about how inspiring it was to honor the veterans, her words polished for the crowd. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I could feel her eyes darting toward me, waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to shrink. I didn't. I kept my gaze on the door, on the sliver of light beneath it, on the promise of something I couldn't yet name. The VFW woman was back at the podium, thanking the sponsors, her voice warm but tired. The night was winding down, the crowd, restless, ready to gather their coats and go home. I should have been ready too. I should have been planning my escape, calculating the steps to the door the moment I could slip away unnoticed. But I wasn't. I was rooted, my body heavy with the weight of waiting, my mind sharp with the certainty that something was about to shift. Then it happened. The door opened, not with a bang, but with a quiet creak, the kind you'd miss if you weren't listening. I was listening. I saw the light spill in, saw the silhouette of a man in the doorway, his frame tall and straight, his presence commanding without a word. The room didn't notice at first. Conversations continued, glasses clinked, Laura's laugh rose and fell. But I noticed. I saw the way he paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for something or someone. He stepped inside, and the light caught him. He was older, maybe 60, his hair silver, but his posture military precise. His uniform was crisp, adorned with ribbons and stars, the kind of decorations that spoke of a life spent in service. A colonel, I realized my training kicking in reading the insignia on his shoulder. He wasn't alone. 2 others followed, a younger officer also in uniform and a woman in a tailored suit, her expression unreadable. They moved with purpose, their steps measured, their focus singular. The VFW woman faltered mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she saw them. The mayor stood his chair scraping against the floor, his smile uncertain. The room began to quiet, heads turning, voices dropping to whispers. Laura's laugh cut off abruptly, and I felt her gaze shift not to me but to the newcomers. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My hands were still in my lap, but my pulse was a drum, loud and unyielding. The colonel stopped in the center of the room, his eyes still searching. The younger officer leaned toward him, murmuring something, and the colonel nodded, his expression grave but resolute. The woman in the suit stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and whispered to the VFW woman, who looked startled but nodded quickly. The podium was hers now, and she took it, her voice cutting through the last murmurs of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone formal, almost reverent. "We have an unexpected guest tonight. Colonel James J. Callahan. United States Army has joined us to deliver a special recognition." She paused, glancing at the colonel, who gave a slight nod. "Please, Colonel, the floor is yours." The room was silent now, every eye on him. Tom straightened in his seat, his chest puffed out, no doubt thinking this was about him. Karen smoothed her dress, her smile eager. Laura leaned forward, her curiosity outweighing her usual composure. I stayed where I was, my back pressed against the chair, my hands trembling now, though I didn't know why. The colonel's presence was like a weight, a force that shifted the air, and I felt it pressing on me, pulling me towards something I couldn't escape. He stepped to the podium, his movements deliberate, his eyes still scanning the room. When he spoke, his voice was deep, steady, the kind that could command a battlefield or a boardroom. "Good evening," he said, and the room seemed to lean in, hanging on his words. "I apologize for the interruption, but there's a matter of great importance that couldn't wait. I'm here to honor someone who's been overlooked for far too long." My stomach twisted. I didn't know why, but I felt it a pull, a certainty like a hand reaching through the years. I wanted to stand, to run, to disappear, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on him, on the way his gaze moved over the crowd, searching, searching. And then impossibly, it stopped. On me. The room didn't see it at first. They were too busy watching him, waiting for a name, a story, a hero they could cheer for. But I felt it, the weight of his eyes, the recognition in them. He stepped away from the podium, his boots echoing in the silence, and began to walk. Not toward the front, not toward Tom or the mayor or the cluster of veterans at the head table. Toward the back, toward me. My breath caught. My hands gripped each other, my knuckles white. I wanted to look away, to sink into the floor, but I couldn't. He was coming closer, his steps steady, his eyes never leaving mine. The younger officer followed, his expression unreadable, and the woman in the suit was there too, her clipboard clutched tightly, her face a mask of quiet intensity. The room began to notice now, heads turning, whispers rising. Laura's table went silent. Tom's jaw tightened. Karen's smile faltered. He stopped in front of me, no more than 3 feet away. The room was a vacuum, every sound swallowed by the weight of the moment. I looked up at him, my heart a wild thing in my chest, and saw something in his eyes, respect, sorrow, determination. He straightened his posture even more rigid, and when he spoke, his voice was clear, carrying to every corner of the hall. "Ma'am," he said, and the word was heavy, deliberate. "We've been looking for you." The room froze. I felt their eyes on me, hundreds of them, but I couldn't look away from him. My mouth was dry, my thoughts a jumble of fear and memory and something else, something like relief. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. I was Kelly Harper, the spinster, the nobody, the woman they'd laughed at. But he was looking at me like I was someone else, someone who mattered. "Colonel," I managed my voice, barely a whisper, "I think you've made a mistake." He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it carried the weight of certainty. "No mistake, ma'am," he said. "We know exactly who you are." The whispers grew louder now, a wave of confusion and curiosity rippling through the crowd. Laura's face was pale, her eyes wide. Tom was on his feet, his brow furrowed, his hands clenched. Karen's hand was on his arm, but she was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. The mayor was leaning forward, his expression a mix of surprise and unease. I felt their gazes like a physical weight, but I couldn't look at them. I could only look at the colonel, at the truth in his eyes, at the storm that was about to break. He turned slightly, addressing the room now, but his words were still for me. "This woman," he said, his voice rising, "has served this country with a courage and sacrifice most of us can only imagine. And tonight we're here to make sure she's recognized for it." My heart stopped. I wanted to stand to protest, to tell him to stop, but my body wouldn't move. My past, the one I'd buried under years of silence, was rising unstoppable, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for them to know, for them to see, for the world to shift under my feet. But it was happening, and there was no turning back. I'm rushing ahead, though. Let me stay here in that moment, in the silence that followed his words, in the weight of their eyes, and the truth that hung in the air. Let me tell you what it was to sit there, to feel the past and present collide, to know that everything was about to change. If you're still with me, if you're listening, this is for you, for anyone who's ever hidden their truth, anyone who's ever waited for the world to see them. The story's not over. It's breaking open now. I sat there, my hands trembling, my eyes on the colonel. The room was a sea of faces, but his was the only one that mattered. He knew my name, my truth, and he was about to speak it. I wasn't ready, but I was here, and there was no going back. The silence in the banquet hall was a living thing, heavy and unbroken, pressing against my skin like a held breath. I sat frozen, my hands gripped together, my eyes locked on Colonel Callahan. His words, "We know exactly who you are," hung in the air, a spark waiting to ignite. The room was staring, their gazes sharp and disbelieving, but I couldn't look at them. I could only look at him, at the certainty in his eyes, at the truth I'd spent years burying, now rising to the surface. I wanted to speak, to stop this, to push the moment back into the shadows where I'd kept it. "Colonel?" I whispered again, my voice barely audible, "Please." But he didn't waver. His expression softened just for a moment, a flicker of understanding, but his posture remained resolute, his purpose clear. He wasn't here to let me hide. He was here to pull me into the light. He turned to the room, his boots echoing in the stillness, and when he spoke, his voice was a blade cutting through the murmurs and the doubt. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward me, "is Major Kelly Harper, United States Army, retired. A covert intelligence officer who served this nation with unparalleled bravery. She is the recipient of 3 Bronze Stars for valor earned in operations most of you will never know about because she swore an oath to keep them secret." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air from my lungs. Major Kelly Harper. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else, someone I'd left behind in deserts and safe houses, in rooms filled with smoke and whispers. I hadn't heard my rank spoken aloud in years, hadn't let myself think of it. But hearing it now from him, it was like a key turning in a lock, opening a door I'd thought was sealed forever. I shook my head, a small, instinctive movement. "It's not," I started, but my voice broke and I stopped. I wanted to say it wasn't me, that I was just Kelly, the librarian, the spinster, the woman they'd laughed at. But the colonel's eyes were on me, steady and unyielding, and I knew he saw the truth. He saw the woman who decoded signals under fire, who'd carried a dying comrade through a war zone, who'd made choices that saved lives and cost others. He saw me, and I couldn't deny it anymore. The room was a sea of faces frozen in shock. Laura's mouth was open, her eyes wide, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Tom was standing, his fists clenched his face, a mix of confusion and something else. Anger, maybe, or shame. Karen's hand was on his arm, but her gaze was on me. Her lips parted, her sequined dress catching the light like a beacon. The mayor was leaning forward, his brow furrowed, his wine glass forgotten. They were all looking at me, really looking for the first time in years. And it hurt God, it hurt, because I'd wanted this once, but not like this, not with their pity turned to awe, their laughter turned to silence. The colonel continued, his voice steady, each word a stone dropped into the stillness. Major Harper's service included operations in multiple theaters under conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. She saved countless lives, often at great personal risk. Her citations for valor speak of courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to duty. He paused, his eyes returning to me softer now, almost apologetic. But she never sought recognition. She carried her honors in silence as only the truest heroes do. I closed my eyes just for a moment, trying to steady myself. A memory flashed unbidden and vivid, a night in a desert compound, my hands shaking as I decoded a signal that would guide a team to safety. The air had been thick with dust, the radio crackling with urgency, and I'd known with every fiber of my being that a mistake would cost lives. I hadn't slept for 2 days, hadn't eaten, but I'd stayed at my post, my fingers flying, my mind sharp despite the exhaustion. When the team came back, one of them, a young sergeant with blood on his face, had grabbed my hand, his eyes wet. "You saved us," he'd said. I'd nodded, said nothing, and gone back to work. That was the first Bronze Star. I hadn't wanted it. I'd wanted them safe. I opened my eyes, and the banquet hall was still there, still silent, still watching. The colonel was holding something, now a folder handed to him by the woman in the suit. He opened it, his fingers deliberate, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This," he said. Holding it up is a letter from the Department of the Army acknowledging Major Harper's service and requesting her presence at a formal ceremony in Washington. "We've been trying to find her for months, but she's a hard woman to track down." He smiled, a small, knowing smile, and the room let out a nervous chuckle, the tension breaking just enough to breathe. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my chest aching with the weight of it all. I wanted to stand to tell him to stop, to tell them all it didn't matter, that I didn't need this. But my legs were lead, my voice gone. I looked at the colonel, at the folder, at the truth spilling out into this room, and I felt exposed raw, like a wound torn open after years of healing. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. Speaking to me now, not the crowd. "Major Harper," he said, "you've carried this alone for too long. Let us honor you now as you deserve." He paused, waiting, and I realized he was asking for my permission, giving me a choice I hadn't had in years. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to be this woman again, the one he was calling forward. But I nodded, a small, barely perceptible movement, and it was enough. He turned back to the room, his voice rising again. "3 bronze stars," he said, and the words landed like thunder, each one earned in moments of extraordinary courage. Major Harper risked her life to protect others, to protect this nation, and she did it without ever asking for praise. Tonight we're here to give it to her whether she wants it or not. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in a wave of murmurs, gasps, and shifting chairs. Laura's face was ashen, her hands trembling. Tom was still standing, his eyes locked on me, his expression unreadable. Karen was whispering something to him, but he didn't respond. The mayor was on his feet now, his face a mask of astonishment. I felt their eyes, their questions, their disbelief, and I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but I couldn't. The colonel's words had pinned me in place, and there was no escaping them. I thought about that night in the desert again, but this time it wasn't the signal or the sergeant's face. It was the moment after when I'd sat alone in the dark, my hands still shaking my body heavy with the weight of what I'd done. I'd known then that no one would ever know, that the world would move on, that my name would never be spoken. I'd been okay with that. I told myself it was enough to do the work to save the lives, to carry the truth in my bones. But now, here, with the room watching and the colonel speaking, I realized it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The woman in the suit stepped forward, holding something, a small box, black and unassuming. She handed it to the colonel, who opened it, revealing a medal, its ribbon catching the light. "This," he said, holding it up as a token of our gratitude, Major Harper. Not a new award, but a reminder of the ones you've earned, the ones you've carried in silence. He looked at me, his eyes steady, and I saw something there, pride, yes, but also sorrow, as if he knew what it cost me to be here, to be seen. I stood, though I don't know how. My legs were trembling, my heart a wild thing, but I stood because I had to. I couldn't hide anymore. The room was still the silence, deeper, now expectant. I looked at the colonel, at the medal, at the truth laid bare, and I felt something crack inside me. Not pain, but release, like a dam giving way after years of holding back. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me stay here in that moment, in the weight of their silence, in the truth that changed everything. Let me tell you what it was to stand there, to feel the past rush in, to know that the woman I'd been was finally seen. If you're still with me, if you're listening, this is for you, for anyone who's ever hidden their strength, anyone who's ever waited for their truth to break free. The story's not done. It's unfolding raw and real, and I'm not hiding anymore. I stood there, my hands at my sides, my eyes on the colonel. The room was a blur, but his face was clear, his voice a lifeline. He was about to speak again, and I knew with every fiber of my being that nothing would ever be the same. The banquet hall was a cathedral of silence, every eye fixed on me, every breath held. I stood, my legs unsteady, my hands trembling at my sides, the weight of Colonel Callahan's words still ringing in my ears. Major Kelly Harper, 3 bronze stars. The truth I'd carried in secret for so long was now laid bare, exposed like a nerve in the bright light of the chandeliers. I wanted to run, to hide, to pull the shadows back around me, but there was nowhere to go. The room had seen me, and I could feel their gazes, shock, awe, confusion, shame boring into my skin. The colonel held the medal high, its ribbon a slash of color against the black velvet of the box. His eyes were on me, steady and kind, but his voice carried to the crowd, firm and unyielding. Major Harper. He said, "This is not about medals or titles. It's about who you are, what you've done, and the lives you've touched. You've honored us with your service, and tonight we honor you." He lowered the box, his movements deliberate, and stepped closer, offering it to me. I didn't take it. I couldn't. My hands were frozen, my throat tight, my mind a storm of memory and fear. I saw the desert again, the safe house, the faces of those I'd saved and those I'd lost. I saw the woman I'd been, Major Harper, not Kelly, not the spinster, not the nobody. She was strong, fearless, a shadow who moved through chaos with purpose. But I wasn't her anymore, was I? I'd spent years burying her, letting this town redefine me, letting their words chip away at the truth. And now here, with the room watching and the colonel waiting, I didn't know how to be her again. "Ma'am," the colonel said softly, "just for me, you've earned this." His voice was a lifeline pulling me back from the edge of panic. I looked at him, at the respect in his eyes, and something shifted inside me. Not courage, not yet, but a quiet resolve, a refusal to shrink. I reached out my fingers, trembling, and took the box. It was lighter than I expected, but it carried the weight of years of secrets, of a life I'd thought was gone. The room exhaled, and then slowly it came alive. A few people stood their chairs scraping against the floor. Then more and more until the entire hall was on its feet, a wave of bodies rising in a gesture I hadn't expected. Applause followed, tentative at first, then louder, filling the space with a sound that was both beautiful and unbearable. I stood there, the box in my hands, my heart pounding, and tried to breathe through it. I didn't want their applause. I didn't want their eyes. But I couldn't deny the warmth of it the way it reached into the cold places I'd carried for so long. I looked out at the crowd, and for the first time, I let myself see them. Tom was still standing, his face pale, his eyes locked on me. There was something new in his expression, not anger, not shame, but a kind of grief, as if he was seeing me for the first time and mourning the years he'd missed. Karen was beside him. Her hands clasped her eyes, wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. The mayor was clapping his smile wide but uncertain, like he wasn't sure what to do with this new version of me. And Laura was sitting her hands in her lap, her face a mask of shock and something else, something that looked like regret. I didn't want to regret. I didn't want any of it. But I felt it, the shift in the room, the way the air had changed. They weren't laughing now, they weren't whispering. They were seeing me, really seeing me, and it was both a victory and a wound. I'd spent so long being invisible, so long enduring their scorn, that this moment, this reverence felt like too much, too late. The colonel stepped back, gesturing for me to take the podium. I shook my head, a small, desperate movement, but he didn't push. Instead, he turned to the crowd, his voice rising one last time. Major Harper's service is a reminder, he said, that heroes don't always wear their stories on their sleeves. They carry them quietly in their hearts, in their actions. Let's honor her not just tonight, but every day, by remembering that courage often walks among us unseen. The applause swelled again, and I felt it like a tide lifting me and threatening to pull me under. I clutched the box, my fingers tight around its edges, and lowered my eyes to the floor. I didn't want to cry, not here, not now, but my throat was burning, my chest aching with the weight of it all. I thought about my father, about his words. You carry your honor in your bones. Kelly and I realized he'd been right. I'd carried it even when I thought I'd lost it, even when the world told me I was nothing. The crowd began to move. People stepping forward, their voices soft but eager. A few veterans approached older men with weathered faces, their hands outstretched. "Thank you, Major," one said, his grip firm, his eyes bright with pride. "Welcome home," said another. And the words hit me like a blow, because I hadn't felt at home in years, not until this moment. I nodded, my voice still gone, and let their hands and their words anchor me. Then Laura was there, standing in front of me, her face pale, her eyes wide. The room seemed to hush again, or maybe it was just my focus narrowing the world, shrinking to the space between us. "Kelly," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." Her hands fluttered like she wanted to reach out but didn't know how. Her apology hung there fragile and raw, and I saw the truth in her eyes. She meant it, or she thought she did. But it wasn't enough. Not after years of her laughter, her jabs, her casual cruelty. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman she'd always been. Bright, beautiful, desperate to be seen. I'd envied her once, not for her looks or her life, but for the ease with which she moved through the world, never doubting her place in it. Now standing here with the metal box in my hands and the room's eyes on me, I realized I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her at all. "It's okay," I said, my voice low but steady, the first words I'd spoken since the colonel's reveal. They weren't true, not really, but they were what I could give her. I didn't want her guilt. I didn't want her to carry anything for me. I'd carried enough on my own. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears, and stepped back, disappearing into the crowd. I felt Tom before I saw him, his presence heavy, his steps hesitant. He stopped in front of me, his hands in his pockets, his face a map of emotions I couldn't read. "Kelly," he said, and his voice broke on my name. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him, at my brother, at the man who'd always been the hero in our family's story. I saw the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, the dawning realization of how little he'd known me. I wanted to be angry, to ask why he'd never looked closer, why he'd let me fade into the background. But I was too tired for anger, too worn for blame. "I couldn't," I said simply, and it was the truth. The oaths, the secrets, the pain they'd built a wall I couldn't climb, not even for him. He knotted his jaw tight, and I saw something shift in him, a resolve to understand, to try. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. The colonel was still there watching, and when the crowd began to thin, he approached again. He didn't speak, just offered a salute, crisp and formal, the kind that carried years of respect. I returned it, my hand shaking but sure, and for the first time that night, I felt like Major Harper, not just Kelly. The gesture was small, but it sealed the moment, grounding me in a truth I'd almost forgotten. The room was emptying now, people gathering their things, their voices softer, their glances lingering. I stood alone, the metal box still in my hands, the weight of the night settling into my bones. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt raw, exposed, but also strangely free. The silence I'd carried for so long had broken, and though it hurt, it was a clean kind of pain, the kind that comes before healing. I'm moving too fast, though. Let me stay here in the aftermath of that moment in the quiet that followed the storm. Let me tell you what it was to stand there, to feel the weight of their reverence and their regret, to know that my truth had finally spoken. If you're still with me, if you're listening, this is for you, for anyone who's ever been unseen, anyone who's ever waited for their moment to be known. The story's not over. It's settling, finding its place, and I'm learning to carry it differently now. I stood there, the box in my hands, the colonel's salute lingering in my memory. The room was almost empty, but I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The banquet hall was nearly empty now. The chandeliers dimmed their light, casting long shadows across the scattered tables. The air smelled faintly of wine and wax, the remnants of a night that had changed everything. I stood near the back, the metal box still in my hands, its weight both foreign and familiar. The crowd had gone Tom and Karen Laura, the mayor, the veterans with their outstretched hands. All of them had drifted out into the night, their voices fading into the hum of car engines and distant stars. I was alone, but not the way I'd been before. Something had shifted, a quiet realignment, like a bone settling back into place after years of ache. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no fire in my chest, no urge to shout or claim the victory others might have seen in this moment. Instead, I felt steady, grounded, as if the truth I'd carried for so long had finally found its place in the world. Colonel Callahan's words still echoed in my mind. Major Kelly Harper, 3 bronze stars, courage sacrifice. But they weren't a crown. They were a mirror showing me the woman I'd been, the woman I still was, even if I'd forgotten her for a while. I walked to the door, my steps slow my shoes, whispering against the hardwood. The metal box was tucked under my arm, its edges pressing into my side, a reminder of the night's weight. Outside, the air was cool, sharp, with the promise of autumn, and the sky was a deep, endless black studded with stars that felt closer than they had in years. I paused on the steps, closing my eyes, letting the breeze wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I didn't feel like I needed to. My house was a short walk away down the gravel road where the town gave way to quiet. I could have driven. My old sedan was parked nearby, but I wanted the walk, the solitude, the chance to let the night settle into my bones. As I moved, my thoughts drifted not to the banquet hall or the colonel's voice, but to the small moments that had brought me here. The library where I'd shelved books and listened to children's laughter. My garden where I'd coaxed life from the earth even when I felt half dead inside. The box under my bed where my medals had waited silent but heavy for me to claim them again. I thought about my father, too, his voice soft in my memory. "You carry your honor in your bones, Kelly," he'd said, and I'd carried it even when it felt like a burden, even when the world told me I was nothing. I'd carried it through deserts and safe houses, through missions that left scars on my body and my soul. I'd carried it through this town, through years of silence and scorn, through moments when I doubted it was still there. But it was. It had always been. When I reached my house, the porch light was on a warm glow against the dark. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set the metal box on the kitchen table. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a friend, not a void. I didn't open the box. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside, not just the metal, but the truth it represented, the life I'd lived, the woman I'd been. Instead, I moved to the living room, to the small shelf, where I kept my father's flag folded tightly from his funeral. I took it down my fingers, brushing the worn fabric, and held it for a moment, feeling its weight, its history, its love. I carried the flag to my bedroom, to the dresser where I kept my own keepsakes. I opened the drawer, pulled out the wooden box that held my medals, 3 bronze stars. Their ribbons faded but intact. I set the flag beside them, not as a trophy, but as a promise. A promise to remember to carry both my father's honor and my own, not in silence, but in the way I lived, the way I moved through the world. The next morning, I went back to the library. The routine was the same: shelving books, helping patrons, answering questions with a smile. But something was different. People looked at me, really looked, their eyes lingering a little longer, their voices softer, more respectful. Word had spread, as it always does in a small town, and by noon I'd heard whispers of my name, of the dinner, of the colonel's words. Major Harper. Someone said an old man with a cane, his voice thick with pride. I nodded, said thank you, and kept working. I didn't need their awe. I didn't need their apologies. I needed this, my life, my quiet, my truth. Tom called that afternoon, his voice hesitant, asking if he could come by. I said yes, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to listen to see if he could meet me where I was now. Laura sent a letter handwritten full of words that felt genuine, but fragile like glass that might shatter under scrutiny. I read it, folded it, and put it away. I'd answer her someday maybe, but not yet. I wasn't ready to carry her regret, not when I was still learning to carry my own peace. The days passed and the town settled the story of the veterans' dinner becoming another thread in its fabric. But I didn't settle. I grew. I started writing late at night, not the classified parts, but the small truths, the way the desert smelled at dawn, the sound of a comrade's laugh, the weight of a choice that saved a life. I didn't know if I'd ever share those words, but writing them felt like reclaiming something, like building a bridge between the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I thought about the colonel, about his salute, about the way he'd seen me when no one else had. I thought about the room, about the silence that had followed his words, about the way it had felt to stand there exposed but whole. I thought about the people I'd served with, the ones who'd come home and the ones who hadn't, and I felt them with me, their strength a part of mine. I didn't need to explain my past to anyone. It lived in my spine, in my hands, in the way I walked through the world. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood in my garden, my fingers in the soil, the earth cool and alive beneath my touch. I looked at the stars just beginning to emerge and felt a quiet power, a peace I hadn't known in years. I was Kelly Harper Major. Harper, the librarian, the sister, the survivor. I was all of them, and none of them needed to be hidden anymore. If you're listening, if you're still with me, I want you to know something. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. You don't need their eyes or their applause to know your worth. It lives in you, in the choices you make, in the silences you carry, in the truths you hold close. You are enough just as you are, and your story, whether it's spoken or silent, is yours to carry, yours to honor, yours to live. I turned back to my house, the porch light glowing the night soft around me. I walked inside my steps, sure, my heart steady. The metal box was still on the table, but I didn't open it. Instead, I took my father's flag, unfolded it just enough to feel its texture, and draped it over my shoulders like a mantle. Then I sat the quiet of my home wrapping around me and let myself rest. Not in triumph, but in grace. This is my story, but it's yours too, for anyone who's ever been unseen, anyone who's ever waited for their truth to be known. You don't need to shout it. You don't need to prove it. You just need to live it day by day until the world catches up. I'm Kelly Harper, and I'm here carrying my honor, my truth, my peace. And if you're out there carrying yours, know that I see you. Know that you're not alone.